the inspiration piece is not really what's on the table. What we're saying is what we have reliable, and how to and can we look at it in the same way that we look at any other historical literature and trust it? That's the piece that's critical, because lots of times people say, I just don't have enough faith to believe the Bible, to believe that what we have in our hands. And that's not an issue of faith, unless it's an issue of faith for us, whether we believe what we read about George Washington or about Genghis Khan or whoever that is. It really is a historical, scientific method of looking at whether or not the documents that we have are reliable.
Yeah, and I think that's a criticism that came up often when I was looking into this issue, when I had my crisis of faith, was, okay, we believe that the original writings that all of these authors wrote were God-inspired, but now we have copies of copies of copies. We don't have any, that was the thing that rocked me. We don't have any original documents for the Bible.
Correct.
So how can you know that what you're reading is actually what Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus, what Matthew wrote when he wrote his gospel, if we don't have the original to compare it to, which gets into the evidence that we have. So I want to talk a little bit about the really exciting topic of manuscripts.
It is kind of exciting.
I like this topic.
I like it. I just know
we're the only ones listening, apparently, at this point.
I remember talking about manuscripts in college and watching all the college students go, I don't want to talk about manuscripts. I want to talk about all of the fights and wars that happen in the Bible. So manuscripts are handwritten copies of a document. So if Rick types out a letter and I write a handwritten copy of it, I have created a manuscript. The original is called the autograph, and then we have manuscripts. We have scraps of manuscripts. And so we don't have any autographs, any original documents for any of the documents in the Bible, which when you first hear that, you can go, oh man, that sounds concerning. Until you realize it's true of virtually every single historical document throughout history.
Right.
And the main reason for that is because they were all written on really bad pieces of paper.
Yeah, stuff that falls apart.
Yep.
When you write stuff on papyrus, it has a lifespan of like 20 to 50 years.
Deteriorates.
And then it's gone.
Sure.
And everything was written on papyrus. So that's why we don't have the originals. So that's not a conspiracy that...
You don't find them in the Vatican.
There's not a biblical National Archives place.
Yeah, there's not. So when it comes to manuscripts, these are fragments of the copies of the copies of the copies of that document.
Recognizing some fragments are larger and more
large.
Tons of text.
Some are the size of a credit card. Some are full manuscripts of the full document letter. So it varies. And that's true, again, of all historical documents. So whether it's the book of Matthew in the gospel or it's writings from Socrates, that's the standard that's applied historically. So I wanted to start and just go through some historical documents just to lay out. This is what's normal for history. So you have Plato's tetralogies, which are famous writings from Plato. We have about 230 manuscripts. Again, fragments, full manuscripts, whatever it might be. We have about 230. Herodotus, which is he's known as the father of history. He's the one that started writing historical stories and documenting all of that. We have about 100 manuscripts from him, accepted as history. Homer's Iliad, which everyone reads in school.
Not my school.
We had to read Homer's Iliad in college, and I read the spark notes of it. It was riveting.
Oh, man.
We're waiting for the movie. Just do the movie. Right? Yeah. Is that how we do it, Chris?
Netflix
special, yeah.
If you're out there, Netflix, let's get on that.
So Homer's Iliad is probably one of the best supported historical documents, even though it's not real history.
Right.
Has about 1,900 manuscripts, which is a really high bar. Yeah. That's abnormal for historical documents.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the New Testaments, the manuscripts that we have that are written in the original Greek language number around 6,000. I think the last time I checked, it was just under 6,000 manuscripts for all.
That's 3 times the Iliad.
Right, which is the Iliad's a very large.
That's math again, right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah,
carry the 1.
And that's just Greek language. When you start putting in other copies of copies, you have the Greek, Hebrew, Armenian, Latin, all that stuff. You get, and then you lump that in with the Old Testament manuscripts that we have. That number grows to over 66,000 manuscripts for the Bible. So when you compare
that's a lot,
to 230 for Plato's tetralogies, or 100 for Herodotus, the father of history, that is always accepted as history. No one questions that. and you compare that to 66,000 for the Bible, it's pretty good support when it comes to things like that, which I think is just really cool. So that is, again, when I'm going through this crisis of faith, that's where it's like...
Well, and if I got 30 seconds to talk about scribes, so these guys that made these copies of copies, this was not just like, oh, hey, I'm bored, I'm going to just copy this down. And this was they believed this was their God-given gig.
Yep.
They didn't just
calling.
hey, I can't get any other job, so I'll do this.
Yep.
They felt like God called them to this process. That's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of like sense of duty and calling. And they had, and then they would copy by hand. Slow process, obviously. But then they had a number of checks and balances to make sure that they didn't mess that up. One of those being starting at the top. However you want to look at this, Hebrew goes different than Greek. But just starting at the top corner and the bottom corner, they would just count the letters and find the center letter. Well, then on the copy, they would just do the same exact thing. If the center letter was not the same, they would trash it and start over. There's no erasers, it's not. They would just trash it and start over. So that's an incredibly powerful process. And they had other checks and balances to make sure that these copies were not.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to discuss and understand that we tend to think of, okay, when the church is copying all these manuscripts, it's written by the uneducated, the lowly of society. Sure. And really, scribes are like the professors of their society. They're elite in terms of their education. These are not people that are just walking in off the street. They're highly trained in doing that. It doesn't mean that mistakes don't get through. We have manuscripts that seem to, like, words are spelled differently, words are put in different places. But because you have so many manuscripts,
that's how we know they're mistakes.
You're able to compare and say, okay, this one's the mistake.
And those errors, and that's why we say, when we use the language, we say in the original manuscripts, we believe it's without error, what God intended there. We recognize that small, slight errors could happen. We've seen some. But any of those errors are errors of spelling, punctuation, spacing. There is no error that changes anything in terms of belief, theology, significant. I mean, none of it is significant. At least not that I've found so far, or anyone else that I'm aware of. So.
I haven't found it.
Okay,
yet.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Jake's our
You were
bro.
curious. You looked at me, so I was just wanted to
If
confirm.
anybody's doing the research on this,
You keep looking.
it's you.
This is fun. I'm just right now. So far, I've just gotten. There's like so many things. I'm like, I'm gonna talk about. Oh, Chris has got scribes.
Sorry.
Let's go, man. This is good. This is fun.
Jake, what do you want to talk about?
Nothing. Chris is saying you guys just
My
keep
bad.
on going.
I get excited about this, man. Manuscripts just get me hot. I'm just
Well,
you were a lot more pumped than I thought. I love it.
One of the things that I think is cool living in the time that we do, we have the benefit of archaeology, and we have the benefit of some of the dating methods to be able to say, oh, this manuscript is older than this manuscript. And so when the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in 1947, all of a sudden they could say, oh no, this is from the time of Christ. This is 1,000 years or almost 2,000 years old. And there's no difference in terms of what we're working with at that point in time with a document that's 2,000 years that predates it 2,000 years. That's really, really cool. And that's what allows us to be able to say, okay, which is probably the closest to the original, to the autograph.
Well, and some of the coolness of that, also some of those manuscripts that we've found more recently, let's say, they take us to within 100 years of the writing. That sounds like a lot to us, because we live in the email text age where it's seconds, but not that 20, 30 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, it was not that fast even. I'm like we're writing a letter and it's going to show up in a couple or 3 weeks. So 100 years to a culture that was predominantly an oral culture, especially in that Old Testament, that is lightning fast. To within 100 years, we've got a manuscript to check against.
There's two things I want to hit on with that. So one, again, if you're comparing it to other historical documents that are accepted in academia, some of them, the first manuscript that we have from when we know that the time was written is a gap of hundreds of years. And that's a normal historical standard. So if you have, I think the closest one we have for the New Testament is within 40 years.
Less than that.
For the Gospel of John, we have a fragment of that manuscript that's within a very short, within the lifetime of that person.
That's the important thing. It's within the lifetime. So as that popped up, somebody, John's friend or somebody who saw something different goes, well, hold on now, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And that just becomes a powerful, again, check and balance to the.
And again, in perspective, because I'm the old guy. No.
You were here before texting and email, weren't you?
As I get older, I time changes somewhat. Okay. So I think things that I read about or that I thought were like ancient times when I was a kid, stuff from the early 1900s. My grandpa was born in 1899. Yeah. I remember my grandpa. I remember conversations with my grandma and grandpa about when they were young. Yep. My picture of World War I is colored by my grandpa's experience. Mm-hmm. And that's now 100 years ago. Yeah. So the distance really is a cool thing. Yeah. That it's so short.